You can't spray a commercial pear orchard with a machine that was built before television. Derek Voss said it toward his demonstration crew, but the orchard was small enough that Cal Prentice heard every word. The morning smelled of wet volcanic soil and the particular green of late May in the Hood River Valley. The pear blossoms just passed, the fruit clusters beginning to set. The rows tight and close under a sky that was still deciding what kind of day it wanted to be. The 1948 Alice Chalmers WC sat at the end of the row. Low clearance, side discharge fan, rebuilt housing with a new bearing Cal had pressed in himself the previous winter. It was not clean the way a showroom machine is clean. It was clean the way a working tool is clean. Maintained, oiled, functional, every component doing what it was built to do. That thing belongs in a museum, Derek said, not a spray season. Cal Prentice was 63 years old. He had one hand on the WC's front fender. He looked at Derek with the patience of a man who has heard this kind of thing before and understands it is not really about the machine. Derek walked toward the rig and pointed at the fan housing. Cal, that equipment hasn't been calibrated to modern droplet specs, hasn't been GPS mapped, and can't variable rate on the fly. You're leaving yield on the table every season, and you don't even know it. The neighboring grower who had recently bought Derek's GPS spray system nodded slightly. The other grower, standing a step behind him, crossed his arms. To Cal's left, a woman named Dr. Irene Wall was standing with a folder at her side. She was 49 years old, an Oregon State University extension specialist in tree fruit production systems, and she had driven up from Corvallis that morning with 5 copies of a study she had spent 3 years conducting. She watched Derek make his case. She did not say anything yet. What Derek Voss didn't know, had not thought to find out, was what was in that folder. Dr. Wall had included Cal's orchard in a 6-orchard comparative study of spray program efficacy in the Hood River Valley. She had run it for 3 growing seasons. The results were in print, peer-reviewed, distributed to the orchard operators in the study, and submitted to the Extension's Grower newsletter 3 days earlier. Cal's orchard led the study. 42,008 tons per acre. Lowest disease incidence of any orchard in the 6. By a margin that was not close. Do you know that feeling when someone tells you the instrument you've spent 40 years mastering is obsolete, and you know exactly what your last 3 harvests looked like? Let's go back 40 years, to the spring Cal Prentice's father handed him a composition notebook and told him exactly what to write down. And why. Jack Prentice had farmed pears in Hood River County since 1961. He was a methodical man, the kind of farmer who repaired equipment before it failed and irrigated on a schedule rather than by feel, and kept records not because anyone told him to, but because he had decided, early in his farming life, that the difference between a good season and a bad one was almost always something you had done or not done that you could have known if you had been paying attention. He handed Cal the first composition notebook in the spring of 1983. Cal was 23 and had just come back from 2 years at the Agricultural College in Corvallis, not quite finishing the degree because his father's hip had given out and the orchard needed him. The notebook had column headers on the first page, written in Jack's hand. Date, temperature, wind bloom stage, pest pressure. Rate, interval, notes, you write it down every time, Jack said. They were standing in the equipment shed, the WC rig parked in its spot, the orchard visible through the shed door in the May morning. Not the computer. Because if something goes wrong, you need to know exactly what you did, and if something goes right, you need to know exactly what you did. How far back do years go? Cal asked. Jack pointed to the shelf above the workbench. 8 composition notebooks, spines facing out, each labeled with a year range. 22 years, Jack said. You can read them all this winter. Don't skim them. Read them. Cal read them that winter. He read them the way you read a long letter from someone who knows the place you are going, not for information, but for understanding. He read about the late frost of 1968 that took the blossom and how Jack had adjusted the spray interval for the weekend set. He read about the mite pressure of 1974 and the specific decision Jack had made about timing that he had later concluded was wrong. And the reasoning for both decisions, written down while the season was fresh. He read about the years when the yield was good and what the spray log showed about those years in retrospect. He began his own notebook in the spring of 1983 and filled it in 5 seasons. He was on his 9th in the spring of 2023. The WC rig had been his father's. Jack had bought it in 1953, used from an orchard outside Parkdale that was replacing its equipment. He had run it for 30 years and given it to Cal when Cal took over the orchard in 1988. Cal had rebuilt it twice. The first rebuild was in 1997 when the engine was tired and the fan bearing was failing. The second was over 2 winters, 2018 and 2019, when he went through the whole machine, engine, hydraulics, the fan housing he modified slightly to improve the discharge angle at the specific canopy height his oldest boss trees had reached. The modification was a small thing. A 4-degree change in the fan discharge angle, achieved by fabricating a new mounting plate on a friend's machine shop. It had taken Cal 2 evenings to measure and 2 afternoons to machine. It had added, by his estimate from water-sensitive test papers placed at canopy positions, about 12% better coverage on the outer quarter of his bosque trees. He had not mentioned the modification to anyone. It was the kind of thing you figured out quietly, from 40 years of watching one orchard, and it was specific enough to his trees' architecture that it would not necessarily transfer to any other orchard. He wrote it up in the 9th notebook, the date, the measurement method, the estimated improvement, the test paper results, and moved on to the next entry. At the Hood River Valley Growers Association spring meeting in March of 2022, Derek Voss gave a technology presentation. He had a projector and a good slide deck, and the easy authority of a man who has given this presentation many times and knows it works. GP's variable rate spray systems, drone scouting integration, real-time weather data linked to spray timing recommendations, canopy sensing algorithms that adjusted application rates on the fly as the machine moved through the row. It was genuinely impressive technology. Cal sat in the 3rd row and watched the demonstration footage and thought about the canopy characteristics of his 12-year bosque trees and whether the sensors could correctly read the density variation between the inner scaffold and the outer tips. When Derek invited questions, Cal asked, "What's the calibration error tolerance at low clearance under 12-foot trees with side discharge?" Derek admitted the system was optimized for higher clearance boom applications. He was working with the manufacturer on a low clearance adapter. Cal said thank you and sat down. Derek said to the room, "The old way of doing things, handwritten notebooks, machine intuition, it gets you to 80%. We're here to get you to 100. Several growers nodded. One, a man named Phil Sorensen, who would later buy the GPS system, looked at Cal with an expression that was not quite pity, but was in that neighborhood. Cal wrote something in the small notebook he kept in his jacket pocket. What he wrote was, "No adapter for low clearance. Note season 2022 canopy samples for comparison." He drove home and pulled his water-sensitive test papers from the previous season's analysis and looked at the coverage results at the Boss canopy's outer tips. The coverage was good. Not perfect. There was no such thing as perfect in a spray program, but consistently good, season over season, with a variation tied predictably to wind speed, which he logged and corrected for. In June of that same year, Derek drove past the orchard on his rounds and pulled over when he saw the WC rig in the row, mid-spray pass. He watched Cal complete the pass and waited at the headland. "Cal, that fan bearing has got to be 5 years past spec," he said. "And the nozzle pattern at that speed doesn't give you the canopy penetration you need on a 12-year Bosk. You're undercovering by 30%. Minimum." Cal asked how Derek had measured the 30%. Derek said it was an estimate based on standard droplet physics for that nozzle configuration. Cal reached into his jacket pocket and produced 3 folded sheets of water-sensitive paper. Each one was marked with the row number and the canopy position, low, mid, outer tip, and each showed the blue-purple staining pattern of water-sensitive paper after a spray event. "These are from last week," Cal said. "The outer tip coverage on row 17 is running 92% of the mid-canopy rate. That's a 4-degree discharge angle modification I made to the housing in 2019. Derek looked at the papers. He looked at them for a long time. He did not say 30% again. He said he would look into the low-clearance adapter specifications and would be in touch. He drove away. Cal folded the test papers back into his pocket, climbed onto the WC, and continued the spray pass. In August of 2022, Derek sent a note to the Hood River County Extension Office suggesting that the Extension's annual spray management workshop include a session on modernization for legacy operations. His note described handwritten spray timing schedules as a potential liability issue. Inconsistent documentation. No digital backup. No linkage to weather station data. The Extension Office's event coordinator passed the note to Dr. Irene Wall. Dr. Wall was, at that point, in the middle of her 3rd year of data collection for the spray study. She had Cal's orchard in the study because his spray records were the most complete she had encountered in 40 years of extension work in the Hood River Valley. Not just the current notebooks, but the father's notebooks, which Cal had allowed her to photograph in their entirety. 40 years of consistent, methodical documentation of every spray event, every yield outcome, every weather variable. She read Derek's note. She looked at the preliminary yield table on her desk. She made a decision about the workshop format. The workshop presentation would be the full study results. She did not contact Derek to tell him. In February of 2023, Derek came to the equipment shed. He had sent a mailer about the GPS system the previous month and had not heard back. He drove out to follow up. He found Cal adjusting the fan timing on the WC, a small tool in his hand, the bearing cover off, the fan shaft visible. Derek stood in the shed doorway. He watched Cal work for a moment. Then he said, "Cal, look, I respect what you've built here. I do. But the valley is moving. The buyers are going to start requiring yield documentation tied to GPS spray records, not handwritten notebooks. You're going to be at a competitive disadvantage within 3 years." His voice was sincere. He was not trying to alarm Cal, he was trying to help him. He genuinely believed what he was saying. Cal set down the tool. He looked at the bearing cover. He said, "What buyers are you talking to?" Derek named 2 regional packing houses. Cal said, "I've talked to both of them in the last month. Neither one mentioned GPS documentation." Derek said he had heard it from a production manager. Cal said, "I'll check. Thanks for letting me know." Derek drove away. Cal put the bearing cover back on. He talked it to spec. He knew the spec from memory and recorded the work in the notebook. Date, bearing adjustment, tool used, torque applied. Then he drove to the orchard and did a canopy walk. His practice before the spray season, going tree by tree through the 42 acres, looking at the branch architecture, the bud development, the evidence of last season's coverage in the wood. He walked it in 4 hours. He made notes on a pad he kept in his vest pocket. He transferred the notes to the composition notebook that evening. He did not call the packing houses about the GPS documentation claim. He had already had those conversations. He knew what the packing houses wanted. They wanted consistent fruit at the right size and sugar level, on time, with documentation of spray materials applied. His documentation was better than anything a GPS system produced, because it included 40 years of context. On May 19th, Cal's copy of Dr. Wall's study arrived at the farmhouse. He read it at the kitchen table with his coffee. He read the methodology section first, then the results. He looked at the yield table for a long time. 42.8 tons per acre, highest in the study by 6.7 tons. Lowest disease incidence at 6.7% against a study average of 14.2%. He called Dr. Wall. He told her he had a question about the disease incidence methodology, specifically how the study had standardized the inspection protocol across orchards with different tree ages. She said she would explain it better on site. She agreed to come on the 25th. On the 24th, Derek called. He was bringing a demonstration crew to do equipment comparisons for 3 growers in the valley the following morning. Could he include Cal's operation? Cal said yes. He did not mention Dr. Wall. May 25th. 8 in the morning. Derek arrived first, with 2 crew members and a truck carrying demonstration equipment. He walked the headland and looked at the WC rig parked at the row end and made his speech to the crew and the 2 neighboring growers who had arrived for the demonstration and to the orchard in general. Dr. Wall arrived at 8:15 with the folder. She parked at the headland and walked up. Cal introduced her to Derek as an Oregon State Extension specialist. Derek said, politely, that he hadn't known she was coming. I had a methodology question, Cal said. She agreed to explain it on site. Derek turned back toward the rig. He continued his case, the GPS system's advantages, the canopy sensing capability, the variable rate application that adjusted to real-time conditions. He was good at this. He knew his product well. Dr. Wall waited. When Derek finished, she said, I think you might want to look at this before you continue. She opened the folder and held the report toward Derek. He took it. He read the title. He found the comparative table. He read the top line. Cal Prentice Orchards, Hood River County. Yield, 42.8 tons per acre. Disease incidence, 6.7%. He read the next line. The orchard in second place was Phil Sorensen's, the grower who had bought Derek's GPS system and who was standing at the headland right now. Phil's yield, 36.1 tons per acre. Disease incidence, 11.4%. Derek looked at the WC rig. He looked at the report. He looked at the orchard, the rows of pears running back into the valley, the volcanic soil between them, the fruit clusters forming on every branch, the results of 40 years of handwritten spray timing built around a rebuilt 1948 machine that had been doing this longer than Derek had been alive. He did not say anything for a while. Phil Sorensen walked quietly to Dr. Wall and took the report from her hands. He read it. He put it back. He looked at the WC rig. The morning was very quiet, except for the orchard. An early blackbird was moving through the upper rows. The mountain was very clear to the north. The study ran in the June Extension newsletter. Print run. 1,300 copies to every grower and industry contact in the Hood River Valley. Cal's yield number was in the second paragraph of the abstract. A photograph of the WC rig ran beside it. Dr. Wall presented the study at the Valley's Midsummer Grower meeting in July. He was asked 3 times about Cal's spray timing methodology, specifically whether the methodology could be transferred to other orchards. She said, "The underlying principle, yes. The specific calibration, no. Every orchard is different." 40 years of records for this orchard, by a grower who learned from 40 years before that is not transferable. It is specific to this place and this person. She directed questioners to contact Cal directly. He received 14 calls over the following month. He answered all of them. He talked for as long as the caller wanted to talk. He did not sell anything. He explained, from his notebooks, what he did and why. And he was clear about what was specific to his orchard and what might generalize to other operations. He told 2 of the callers about his father's notebooks on the shelf above the workbench. He told them that reading those notebooks had been one of the most useful things he had ever done as a farmer. He told them that if their fathers had kept similar records, they should read them before doing anything else. Derek's next newsletter to Valley growers made no mention of orchard-specific yield comparisons. Phil Sorensen called Cal in August and asked if he could come by and walk the orchard. Cal said of course. They spent a morning in the rows together. Phil asked questions. Cal answered them. Phil went home and thought about the season he'd had with the GPS system, good yields, good coverage, nothing wrong with it, and about the 6 ton per acre gap in the study table. He did not return the GPS system. It was good equipment. But he bought a composition notebook the following week. Cal took the 9th composition notebook off the shelf at the end of harvest and looked at it for a moment. Every page was full. 40 years represented in 9 of these. His father's 8 on the shelf above. He started the 10th. He wrote the date at the top of the first page and the year's season summary across the first 2 lines. 42.8 tons per acre, final harvest. 6.7% disease incidence. WC rig, modified fan housing, bearing service March 15th, 12 spray events, average interval 12 days. He put the notebook on the workbench. He went out to the equipment shed and looked at the WC. The orchard was visible through the shed door, the trees stripped to their branch structure now, the fruit gone, the rows empty and waiting for next season's beginning. He put his hand on the fan housing. The metal was cool. The bearing inside it was tight and true, the way a bearing should be after a careful service. The fan would be ready when the spray season came. He went inside. There is something in Cal Prentice's story that does not reduce to the yield number, though the yield number is real and significant. The difference between 42.8 tons and 36.1 tons at the market price of $420 per ton is approximately $28,000 per year. Over 3 years, it is $84,000. Over the next decade, it is a retirement. The number is not abstract. But the number is not the point. The point is what produces the number. 40 years of paying attention to one orchard. 40 years of writing it down. The particular modification to a fan housing that came from watching how the spray deposited on the outer branches of 12-year bosque trees and deciding the angle needed to change by 4 degrees. The knowledge that lives in a composition notebook and in the hands of a man who learned it from his father, who learned it from 30 years before that. You cannot buy this knowledge. You cannot install it. There is no GPS system that produces it, because it is not a technology problem, it is a time problem. And the only solution to a time problem is time. Derek Voss was not wrong about his technology. The GP spray system worked. Phil Sorensen's yields were good. The system did what it was designed to do. But it was designed to solve a different problem than the one Cal had been solving for 40 years, which was the problem of knowing one specific orchard so completely that the orchard had no surprises left. That knowledge is rare. It takes a lifetime, or in Cal's case 2 lifetimes, his father's and his own. It looks, from the outside, like stubbornness or sentiment or resistance to change. It looks like a 1948 tractor parked at the end of a row, and a man with his hand on the fender, and a notebook in his jacket pocket. From the inside, it is the most precise instrument in the orchard. If Cal Prentice's story found something in you, the respect for knowledge that can't be calibrated or updated or sold in a system package, subscribe and hit the bell. We have more of these every week. We have the story of a widow in the Texas Hill Country who spent 3 years restoring her grandfather's orange tractor, and the moment a $38,000 appraisal was read aloud at a county fair. We have the story of a Virginian shepherd who bred for wool fineness for 34 years while the county broker graded his flock at the bottom of the scale. We have more coming. Tell us in the comments, what knowledge do you carry that no system can replace? What did you learn from watching one thing closely for a long time? We want to know. We'll see you next week. The water-sensitive papers. Cal had developed the water-sensitive paper test himself in the early 2000s after reading about its use in commercial spray program evaluations. The papers were standard agricultural testing supplies, cards treated with a water-reactive chemical that turned blue-purple on contact with droplets, showing exactly where the spray had deposited and at what density. He had begun using them systematically in 2002 and had done a full canopy test every third spray event since then, a grid of papers placed at 6 positions in a representative row, collected after the spray pass, dried, and measured with a hand magnifier against a density reference scale. The results went into the notebook alongside the spray event record. 20 years of these tests, enough data to see how the coverage pattern changed with wind direction, with tree age, with the 4-degree fan modification he had made in 2019. Enough data to know, within a narrow range, what a given spray event was going to achieve before he looked at the papers. Derek had not known about the tests. He had not asked. His mental model of a handwritten notebook operation did not include this kind of systematic instrumentation, because his mental model assumed that old methods meant less rigorous. He was wrong about this, the way people are sometimes wrong about things they have decided in advance. When Cal produced the 3 papers from his jacket pocket in June of 2022, Derek had looked at them and gone quiet. That quiet was the closest thing to an acknowledgement he made for nearly a year. The papers themselves were small things. A 3-inch by 5-inch card, blue staining on pale yellow background, numbers written in Cal's hand on the back of each one. They were not glamorous evidence. They were not a peer-reviewed study or a certified appraisal. They were what 40 years of careful observation produces, the habit of checking, the discipline of recording, the evidence that accumulates quietly when no one is asking for it. The orchard in November, the Hood River Valley in November, is a different place than it is in May. The pear trees are stripped, the leaves gone, the bronze structure bare against the gray sky. The volcanic soil between rows shows dark and wet from the early rains. The mountain is close. You can see it clearly now that the summer haze is gone, and it is already carrying snow above 7,000 feet. Cal walked the orchard on a Saturday morning in the second week of November. He did this every fall, a full inspection of the branch structure, the crown health, any winter pruning decisions that would need to be made before February. He carried the vest pocket pad and wrote as he went. He knew every tree in this orchard. Not metaphorically. He knew, in the specific sense of having looked at each one in most of the last 40 seasons, exactly where each tree's tendencies lay, which ones were prone to fire blight under wet spring conditions, which ones set too densely and needed more aggressive thinning, which ones had branch angles that made spray coverage difficult and required a second pass at a different approach angle. This was what Derek Voss could not buy. Not because Derek's GPS system was inadequate. It was excellent technology, and Phil Sorensen's yields under it were genuinely good, but because the GPS system's sensors read what was there in the moment, while Cal's knowledge included what had been there across 40 years of moments. The tree that had recovered from a late frost in 2007 and had grown a compensating scaffold structure that affected its fruit set pattern since then. The row where the morning fog held longest and the morning spray timing needed to be pushed 15 minutes. The specific trees, 11 of them, in the northeast corner of the Bartlett block that had run consistently 5% above the average yield for 20 years, something Cal had documented but never found a single-factor explanation for. He made notes on these 11 trees each fall. He had made notes on them every fall since 1995, when he first noticed the pattern. He had sent a soil core from that corner to the extension lab twice. The results were not significantly different from the rest of the orchard. The differential yield remained unexplained. He noted it and kept watching. This was the thing about an orchard. It was always telling you something. The question was whether you were set up to hear it. Jack Prentice's last season. Cal was 48 years old when his father died. Jack had kept farming the orchard in an advisory capacity for years after Cal took over formally, coming out on mornings when the spray decisions were complex, standing at the headland with his coffee, watching the WC move through the rows. He had not driven the machine himself since 2001, when his vision had gotten bad enough to make it impractical. But he had watched. In his last spray season, the spring of 2008, Jack had come out on 3 mornings. He was 83 years old and slow, but his attention was as precise as it had ever been. On the 3rd morning, he had watched Cal complete a pass in the Bosque block and said, "When Cal came to the headland, you're pushing the outer tip coverage too hard in that section. The canopy there is tighter than you're accounting for. Back the fan speed off by 200 RPM and add 10 minutes to the interval." Cal made the note. He made the adjustment on the following pass. He tested it with water-sensitive papers. The coverage was better. Slightly, but measurably. He called his father that evening to tell him. Jack said he had noticed the canopy density shift in 2003 and had been watching it develop since. He said he had meant to mention it sooner. Jack died in November of that year. Cal had driven home from the hospital in the dark and gone directly to the equipment shed and sat in the WC seat for about 20 minutes, in the cold, not running the engine. Then he had gone inside. He had read his father's notebooks again that winter. Not for the information, he had read them before, but for the handwriting and the reasoning behind each decision, and the particular voice of a man who had looked at the same orchard for 40 years and written down what he saw. He found the 2003 entry about the Boss canopy density shift. Jack had noticed it 5 years before he mentioned it and had been watching it develop and had written his observations down every season without saying anything. The entry ended with a note: Cal will adjust when it needs adjusting. He had. Derek's next move, the newsletter Derek sent to Hood River Valley growers in September 2023. His quarterly technology update mentioned nothing about orchard yield comparisons. He had published yield data in the previous 2 newsletters, featuring his customers' results as evidence of the GPS system's effectiveness. He did not publish yield data this time. He did write a section about spray program documentation, specifically about the advantages of digital log systems for record keeping, audit trail maintenance, and buyer documentation requirements. It was a good section, technically accurate and practically useful. He did not mention handwritten notebooks. He was not retreating, exactly, he was recalibrating. He was a man who dealt in empirical claims, and the empirical claim he had made about Cal's orchard had been conclusively resolved. He was smart enough to know that publishing yield comparisons in this valley, this fall, was not something he wanted to do. He called Cal in October. "I'd like to understand what you're doing with the water-sensitive papers," he said. "The test protocol. I'd like to see if there's a way to build something similar into the GPS system's calibration process." Cal said he would walk him through it. They spent a morning in the orchard in mid-October. Cal showed Derek the placement protocol and the density scale and the measurement method. Derek took notes, digital, on a tablet. He asked good questions. He was interested in the methodology in a genuine way, not a defensive one. They parted at noon. Derek drove back to the valley. Cal walked the headland for another hour, pulling the last of the season's test papers from their clips on the tree stakes. He put them in the notebook. Phil Sorensen's notebook, by the time of the following spring spray season, had 87 entries. He had started it in August and filled it through the fall pruning notes and the winter soil amendment decisions and the first spray event of the new season. He had developed his own column headers. They were not identical to Cal's, because his orchard had different variables and different trees and 40 fewer years of context. But the habit was there. He had called Cal twice with questions about the methodology. Cal had answered both calls at length. On the second call, Phil had said, "I thought this was going to feel like going backward." "It doesn't." Cal said, "It never did." He drove back to the orchard. The spray season was 2 weeks away. The blossom timing was running about 3 days ahead of the average, which he noted in the notebook with a reference to the 2004 and 2011 seasons, which had shown similar early timing. He checked the fan bearing. It was good. He checked the nozzle tips. He replaced 3 that were beginning to show wear, not bad yet, but not perfect. He recorded the replacement in the notebook, date, nozzle positions, nozzle code, vendor. Then he went to work on the canopy walk. 42 acres, tree by tree, the notebooks, the eyes, the 40 years. The same as always, the only way he knew. In the season following the study's publication, Cal's orchard yield came in at 43.1 tons per acre, slightly above the previous year. Disease incidence held at 6.4%. Dr. Wall included a 1-paragraph update in her spring newsletter, Cal Prentice Orchards, Hood River County. Second-year follow-up from the 2023 study. The results were consistent. No statistical departure from the 3-year mean. She sent Cal a copy with a handwritten note. "Consistent is the hardest thing to achieve. Congratulations on another solid season." He put the note in the notebook. Not in the data columns, in the inside back cover, where he kept the things that were not data but belonged with the record anyway. Then he started the following season's entry. Date, temperature, wind, bloom stage, best pressure, rate, interval, notes, the same headers his father had written on the first page in 1961. 60 years of pear orchard, Hood River County, Oregon, 2 lifetimes of paying attention to one piece of ground, one crop, one set of trees that had been growing since before either of them was born. The W.C. Riggs sat in the shed, ready. The notebook was open on the workbench. The orchard was through the door, doing what orchards do, working through the season in the particular way of living things that have been learning their conditions for a very long time. Cal walked out to start the morning canopy check. The mountain was very clear to the north. There are things you can measure and things you cannot. The GPS spray system measures canopy density and wind drift and application rate with real-time precision that a handwritten notebook cannot match. This is true. Derek Voss was right about this. His system did what it promised to do. What it could not measure was the particular morning in 2003 when Jack Prentice noticed that the boss canopy in the northeast section was thickening in a way that would require a spray adjustment in 5 years. What it could not measure was the 2007 frost recovery pattern in the trees that had survived it. What it could not measure was 60 years of accumulated decisions about this specific soil in this specific valley, written down in 42 composition notebooks by 2 men who understood that the orchard was always telling you something, and that the only instrument capable of hearing it was one that had been listening long enough. Technology is not the enemy of this knowledge. The GPS system and the composition notebook are not at war with each other. Phil Sorensen's orchard will be better in 20 years than it is now, if he keeps the notebook. Derek Voss's question about the water-sensitive paper methodology was a good question, asked in good faith, and the answer he got will make the GPS calibration process more useful. But the knowledge that produced 42.8 tons per acre in the Hood River Valley study is not a method. It is not a system. It is a lifetime. You know what it costs to build a lifetime of attention to one thing. You know what it asks of you, the willingness to be wrong in one season and learn from it in the next. The discipline of writing it down when no one is asking you to. The patience of watching something develop over years without knowing what it will become. That knowledge is yours. Nobody can take it from you, and nobody can sell you a faster version of it. It takes the time it takes. Tell us in the comments what you've spent that kind of time on. We want to know. Subscribe and hit the bell, because this kind of story is here every week, and there are more of them than we can count. We'll see you next time.